our coverage on academics amid the pandemic. No matter if your child is attending school in person or online, it's been a struggle for parents throughout our state. Joining us to talk about some of the issues surrounding education is Dr. Brad Bartels, the Executive Director of the Utah Education Association and the state's largest teacher union. Brad, thank you so much for joining us today. We want to start out the conversation by talking about what are some of the early successes and failures that we're seeing in schools right now?
Yeah, sure. So one of the things I think it's important for us to remember is nobody wants to be back with face-to-face learning with kids, children, more than teachers do. We know that the best learning and the best teaching takes place in a face-to-face environment. So as far as successes go, when we've been able to go back into the classroom to teach our students in a manner that's safe and properly socially distanced with good plans to go back to school, it's been working really well. But one of the things is our communities are so different and our schools are so different. There are schools in which, school districts and schools in which the plans maybe they're not as good. They don't provide for as safe a standards for teachers and for students. Those are the things we need to work on going forward to make sure that all of our teachers, all of our educators, and all of our students are teaching and learning in a safe environment.
So there are outbreaks at several schools in Salt Lake County, and UEA wants the governor to suspend in-person instruction at schools with more than 15 positive cases. So talk to us about this issue. Why is this so important?
Yeah, it's really important because, I mean, we have the state guidelines for a reason, and that's where that 15 case limit comes from. The important thing to remember about the 15 case limit, though, is that it's not just a school that we're talking about. It's a community. If we have spikes in our communities, we're going to have spikes in our schools. And so if you have 15 active cases within a school, what that really tells you is that the community may be having a problem. And we may need to look at what are ways that we can increase enforcement of that? What are ways that we can, what are ways that we can encourage school districts to really ensure that there's proper social distancing and there's proper safety?
One thing that I heard from a school board meeting last week that I was at is some schools may have 2,400 students. Some schools maybe five. Changing that number from 15 cases to maybe a percentage, maybe 1% of students or 2% of students. If they have that many cases, then they would shut down the schools. What's your take on maybe changing the number to a percentage instead?
Well, the problem is it's a larger issue than just the number of students that have been diagnosed with COVID within a school. It's a community issue. So regardless of the size of the school, if you're having that high of an incidence rate, it's telling us that there may be problems in the community. A community spike equals a spike in the schools. And so the size of the school is really less important than essentially what the community is going through, how the community is handling it, how we're really dealing with some of the precautions that we need to take within the schools and within the community as a whole.
Now, we know that stability and consistency is something that's really important for students. So are the students receiving a quality education right now?
So I know the educators in Utah are working to make sure that our students are receiving a quality education, and the answer is yes, they are. But we can do better. We can do better by essentially having a mandate, wide. We can do better making sure that the State Board of Education and local school districts are really monitoring what's going on within the schools. Make sure that we're ensuring social distancing, that we're ensuring proper safety precautions within the schools, that we're essentially enforcing some of the isolation and quarantine rules that we have to ensure that the spread doesn't increase. And so, yeah, I think that we're having great success. We definitely want to make sure that our students are learning. I think they are receiving a quality education. I can tell you the teachers within the state of Utah are working so hard to make sure that students are getting proper teaching, whether it's virtual, whether it's face-to-face, or whether it's a hybrid type of system. It's just amazing how hard the teachers have been working and how seriously they're taking this.
All right, still a lot more that we want to explore. Don't go anywhere. We'll be right back with Dr. Brad Bartels, Executive Director of the Utah Education Association.
Live from Utah's CW30. starts now.
Welcome back to the CW News at 7:30. Now we want to continue our discussion regarding academics during the pandemic. Before the break, Brad Bartels, Executive Director of the Utah Education Association, joined us in studio to talk about how teachers are doing so far during the pandemic. We're going to pick up right where we left off. Brad, what kind of role should parents play during this unprecedented time? So we know that for teachers who may have younger students that are learning from home, it can be challenging to make sure that they log on at the right time and they engaged during the whole session. So how can parents play into this equation?
So there's a couple things. Number one, it's important that parents remain patient. Teachers also have children of their own a lot of times that they're trying to instruct at home if they're virtual learning, and as well as handling their student loads from their own classes. So number one is we have to be patient. It's an amazingly difficult thing to do. To teach face-to-face and also teach virtually at the same time. So patience is good. It's also important that parents remember that we really need to follow some of the safety guidelines as far as masking and social distancing and some of those things on a consistent basis, and really model that for their kids so that when the kids do come to school, some of those safety things are going to be in place. So that would really be my advice to parents is, just continue to work with teachers and with your children. The parental role in education is huge. And in a very real sense, parents and teachers are partners in this enterprise. And so I think it's important, the more closely you can work with your child's teacher, the better the result's going to be.
I love that tip, right? Putting them in that habit so that they get used to this behavior. I want to talk about some data that we've been seeing through the schools. So if we could just pull up some of our stats here. In Salt Lake County alone, the county's 151 schools, there have been 583 total cases and 394 in just the past 2 weeks. So the districts with the highest case counts are Canyons, Jordan, and Granite. So Canyon School District, 194 total, 159 in the last 14 days. Jordan School District, 148 total, 107 in the last 14 days. Granite School District, 111 total, and 59 in the last 14 days. So really, Brad, what we're wondering here, we're seeing all of these, outbreaks, we're seeing these numbers grow. Are school districts doing a good job at keeping their students, their staff, their faculty pandemic, and is there enough support being given to our teachers?
Well, that's a great question. As I mentioned earlier, we have school districts that have all different varieties of plans right now. And some school districts, I think, are doing a really good job building systems that work, that really put a reasonable workload on educators, where they have sufficient safety provisions in place. In other places, it's not quite so clear that we're doing a great job. There are some school districts where there has been more incidents of COVID, particularly recently. And as I mentioned earlier, that's really kind of symptomatic of what's going on in the community itself. But some school districts continue to do a really good job face-to-face learning. Some school districts have, huge challenges as far as that goes, just by the number of students and whether if it's a metro school district and some of the challenges that take place in larger schools, and kind of underline the importance of virtual learning.
At the end of the day, what would you guys like to see come from these meetings that are happening between, the governor and state officials? What do you hope comes? I mean, there's a lot of in-depth discussion going, a lot of things at stake. What do you guys hope comes out of this?
So we've spent a lot of time communicating about what really we want to see for our educators in Utah. Number one is we would like to see an enforceable mandate from the governor's office to ensure that we're not opening schools in a way that's putting educators and children and parents at risk. Number two, we'd like the State Board of Education to do a better job monitoring the plans that school districts have in place to ensure that they're workable and that they ensure safety of educators and children. And finally, look at district boards of education. It's important when they have a plan in place that's workable that they continue to really monitor how they're doing and ensure that what's going on within the schools is really in the best interests of our kids and our educators, making sure that we have proper cleaning procedures in place, making sure that we have rules in regard to masking, making sure we have rules in regard to actually being followed, really trying to ensure that our educators don't have such a massive workload between face-to-face learning and virtual learning, and that the number of students that they teach remains reasonable. Right now, there's an incredible amount of stress in some schools and some school districts because teachers are essentially being asked to work 24/7. They have to work virtually. They have huge classes in some cases, and they're also expected to kind of pick up the slack when a substitute is needed. It's just the workload has been unbelievable.
Yeah, this has been a very, very complex issue. Something that we would love to continue diving in with you in the near future. Sorry, we're out of time, but Dr. Brad Bartels, Executive Director of the Utah Education Association, thank you so much for your insight and thank you for coming in.
Thank you.